So I have done it. I've played all of the Unalive Squad Kills the Justice League game. And yes, I do have to use that term instead of the actual name because, well, YouTube. But back on track. I've played all of Rocksteady's newest DC game, and, well, the best way to describe it is it's a mess. Now, this is not going to be a whole video of me ragging on every single detail in the game and say that it is the single worst thing that has ever happened to the DC universe. I think that would be intellectually dishonest. I think the game has its flaws, many of them, which we'll break down in a moment, and it definitely has some things going for it as well. I do, however, also find it odd just how divisive this game has become in terms of the polar extremes, where it seems like people are either irrationally supportive of the game or basically call it the single worst thing to have ever happened to DC gaming. So let's start on the good stuff about the game. I really like the graphics, particularly the expressiveness of the characters' faces is good. In fact, I would probably go as far as to say it's great and some of the best animations and expressiveness that I've ever seen in a video game. It really just looks super duper emotive and very realistic. So that is a massive W. So the graphical element really does make the game feel like the AAA experience that it is trying to be. I would also say that the audio design is really well done. Whether it be the way that the guns sound or the oomph and the bassiness of the grenades as they're going off, and pretty much everything in between, most of those elements of the game are actually quite well done. And since we're on the topic of sound, I do think that almost all of the voice actors on this game did a great job sounding convincing, believable, trying to deliver the lines that they were written to deliver as best as they could. I think the biggest problem with the voice acting in this game is more so what the characters are saying, not how they are saying it, which is obviously more of a criticism of the writing than the voice acting itself. But we'll get to all that in a moment. And finally, on the positive side of things, I do think that the traversal for King Shark, Captain Boomerang, and Deadshot is really fun. It's very engaging and really makes all three feel like distinctly different characters, at least in the way that they move. You might have noticed that I specifically not mentioned Harley Quinn, and that was by design because, well, I think she's the least fun and intuitive character to play as in the game, which is super unfortunate because coming into the game, she's the character that we are all most familiar with from the Arkham universe. And it would have been nice to have her be one of the better characters in this game, since we have so much rapport built up with the character already. In fact, coming into this title, I was hoping to use that character as my main one. And as of right now, she is by far my least played character. Now, I do have some other smaller positives, like for example, I really enjoyed the Flash boss fight. I felt like it was a really great interpretation of what I guess Flash would be like to battle against, especially if you're using characters that are predominantly using guns, and I felt like they tried to come up with creative gameplay solutions to make that fight a lot of fun. So I felt like it was hectic, I felt like it was fun, and that was definitely a big highlight of the entire game. Oh, and speaking of cool moments, the mission called Night at the Museum is going to be a very memorable one, so make sure you enjoy that one when you make your way through the game. So now let's get to the negative side of things, and first and foremost, the biggest problem the game has is that it is a buggy mess. I will say that playing in single player and just the main story in single player, which by the way is only around 8 to 10 hours long, I ran into very few bugs and issues, or I guess very few bugs and issues that would be disconcerting and game breaking. However, when I hit the end game and began putting hours into the multiplayer side of things, wow. I mean, from the game completely crashing on my PlayStation 5 to a random blank white screen that would appear after completing a mission or a boss fight, to literally the enemies not reacting or registering any sort of damage I or any of my teammates were doing. So it wasn't a case of where, oh, I'm the only one that's experiencing this. So were all of my other teammates that were on my team during that particular play session. And all the while this was going on, the game gets to points where it feels like it's running at like 20 FPS, and that is being generous. I've also run into an issue multiple times where as you're launching the game, I have to essentially just sit there and wait on the signing into WB account page for a period of roughly 30 minutes or so before I can actually just launch into the game, which is incredibly frustrating. And no, it doesn't help just closing the game and starting it back up. If I do that, it's like the entire cycle resets. The other thing that was extremely frustrating was that as relatively smooth as my experience was during the campaign, or like the main story of the game in single player, now when I try to play the end game content in single player, I constantly run into a bunch of issues and bugs, whether it be like a dipping frame rate, especially if there's a lot of things going on the screen, like if there's any sort of big grenades going off or anything like that, it immediately starts to kind of struggle to actually maintain that frame rate. Or bigger issues, like for example, I will have moments where enemies will literally just stop spawning in. I'll be flying around, I'll be looking for enemies, they're nowhere to be seen, then suddenly all of them will spawn in all at once, and then my game crashes. And considering that this game is being sold as a live service game and something where most of our value as customers is supposed to be extracted from the end game, it's really disappointing to see that the end game is the most bug-riddled part of the game. Now, I've already seen some people say something along the lines of, hey, it's a multiplayer live service game. That's how they launch. You have to give them time to make the game operational. No, I don't. In fact, I don't even understand how so many gamers have become so accepting of games launching in a broken state or in a non-functional state to the point where they now defend it and choose to attack fellow customers for their dissatisfaction. But let's assume you get past all of these technical bugs. What else is there? Well, you have, in my opinion, a very subpar story to experience as well. Beyond just attracting a lot more in sales, I will never understand why they actually chose to make this game part of the Arkham verse. The previous entries of the Arkham verse, even the one that wasn't made by Rocksteady, have done such an incredible job of building a brilliant world that we have all become invested in. And this game essentially takes all of that established foundation and uses it, in my opinion, in an irresponsible manner to tell a subpar story at best. I mean, there will be moments that will make you chuckle.
Waller, the penguin is in flight. Repeat, the penguin is in flight.
Then let's clip his wings.
Fricasseed penguin. Let's get him to... Oh my god, he's getting up!
Hitting him again.
Don't get me wrong, but the majority of this story feels like it was written by people that have very little understanding or care for either the DC universe and, even more importantly, for the Arkhamverse as a whole. I understand the concept of the game. Don't get me wrong. I have no inherent issue with playing as the bad guys, killing the quote-unquote good guys. But I still think it's important to take at least some time to establish some sort of redeeming qualities or just depth for these characters so that it feels like you have at least a level of motivation to see them succeed. With the exception of King Shark, none of this is done in this game. You're given very little to no reason at all to want to see these characters be successful in accomplishing their task. So for example, to me, I wish that the game would have been much more forefront with the fact that this might indeed be a Justice League from an alternate set of universes, brought in by Brainiac as almost a trade type system where essentially our good Justice League has swapped spots with these evil counterparts. Instead, they sort of kind of vaguely hint at this possibly being the way that they're going, with Flash shown to be regrowing his thumb somehow, a complete misunderstanding of how the Green Lantern ring and the Green Lantern Corps as a whole work, and Superman's seemingly newly found resistance to kryptonite. Yes, I get that they're probably going to use this as their cop-out answer in the end and say, hey, none of anything that you did across the storyline actually mattered, and everything that these characters thought that they were doing wasn't actually being done and was actually being done to some sort of evil clones or something along those lines. Which, again, should that end up being the case, that would make this story feel even less important and make these characters seem like even bigger losers than they already are. I guess at the end of the day, what it really comes down to is that the story just simply feels bland. For something that could have genuinely been a really cool idea, i.e. Prototype or the Bully game series, essentially taking that and applying it to the DC universe could definitely be a lot of fun. but instead we end up with a soulless story that feels like it leaves the Arkhamverse in a far worse place than where it found it. Next, I did want to touch on the gameplay side of things, because I actually do think that the core gameplay is not bad. It's nothing spectacular, don't get me wrong, but the guns are cool enough and they handle well. But I do think it would be really cool if there was more of a difference between how each of these characters played. Like, for example, if we take something like Marvel's Avengers, that game had the benefit of having really varied gameplay depending on whatever hero you played. So if you played as the Hulk, you had abilities that made you feel like the Hulk. If you played as Ms. Marvel, you felt like you were playing Ms. Marvel. Here, because all the characters are basically just using guns, you do start to feel like the gameplay loop between the four of them start to feel a little bit more redundant. So I do kind of wish that maybe there would be a bit more abilities. They definitely move differently, which is a major W, as I mentioned before, but I wish that there would also be a tad bit more variance to how they played. And who knows, maybe over time, as they add more varied weapons and add depth to the type of weapons, and I guess more importantly, what those weapons can do, this issue might subside. So we can only hope. Next, I would like to talk about the thing that most people hate in video games nowadays, and that is skins. They look great actually, but they are unbelievably expensive. If the launch store is anything to go by, the skins have essentially 3 different purchase scales, and the most expensive of the bunch, the legendary variant, will run you $20 US. Of course, adjust this accordingly to whatever country you live in. Now, considering that this is a full price game, and the fact that the base game gives you very little in terms of skin selection, charging up to $20 for each additional skin seems a little gluttonous, to say the least. Now, I could go on and on with other smaller elements that I dislike, like the incredibly busy and cluttered UI and HUD, even though you can turn off some parts of it, although it does make the game feel a little bit more difficult to actually get through when you start turning a lot of these features off. The poor to no actual characterization for the majority of the characters that appear in the game. That includes Amanda Waller and Toyman and Lex Luthor and most definitely Brainiac. The unnecessarily complicated weapons upgrade system that legitimately makes you feel like you have to do homework in order to actually understand it and then enjoy it. But I don't want to get too nitpicky. So there you have it. To wrap up, to say that I'm disappointed would be an absolute understatement. I absolutely adore the Rocksteady Studio and the Arkhamverse that they have built, but unfortunately, this one is a huge misfire. In fact, maybe that's why it feels so extremely disappointing, is because we know that that team is so capable of delivering a much better game, an incredible experience that to a certain extent changes the games industry as a whole. That's what Batman Arkham Asylum did. And so to see them then go out and make a game like this is extremely disappointing. Now, of course, yes, I'm aware because this game is a live service game, over time, it might end up being a better overall experience as they address server issues, bugs, etc. However, I obviously can't talk about what the game might end up being. We don't know which direction it ends up going. So because of that, I have to talk about the experience that I have, and it is not a positive one. As of right now, I cannot recommend picking up this game, especially nowhere near a full price. I do think that eventually, as time goes on, should they address things like the bugs and glitches, and if you can get this game around the $30-ish mark, maybe around the $25 mark, I do think that you might find some fun to be had here as well. But there you have it. Those are my thoughts on the Unalive Squad Kill the Justice League. If you guys enjoyed the video, please don't forget to hit the thumbs up button. You can get to discussing down in the comment section below, although just try to go on ahead and remain civilized in your conversation. Even if you disagree, you can maintain a civil conversation. So please do so down in the comment section below. And of course, beyond all of that, if you would like to see my gameplay walkthrough for the game, you can click the video you're currently seeing on your screen. Thanks all for watching, and I'll hopefully catch you guys here on the next one. Peace out. See you later, alligators.